Welcome. Welcome to those that just joined. I think we're going to get started, and then we'll allow everyone else to come on in when it's their time to be able to join us. So I'm going to stop sharing now. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for tonight's session. We're so glad that you're able to tune in today and listen and learn with us. We at the EFM or the program team are very excited for tonight's session that we've planned for you. In preparation for tonight's discussion, I thought, are we keeping watch of what is happening around us? Are we keeping watch of what is happening not only here in Marin County, but in other regions on our planet? This year's forum we titled The Reciprocity of Earth's Living Systems. And in the first session, we got to hear some of the systemic challenges that we face around housing and how our land use practices deeply impact our lived experiences as a community. After that, we were able to meet with a few Indigenous leaders from the Cultural Conservancy, as well as the Association of Ramaytush, and they shared with us insightful knowledge on Indigenous values and practices that are tied to land. And we were all left with the question, how is it that we're connecting and being in relationship with land and nature in a way that is reciprocal, but also sustainable? The severe weather patterns, I don't know if you've taken a look, but just a few days ago, it was very raining severely, and I was personally scared. There's also severe weather in Santa Cruz and other areas of California, and what is happening recently in Malawi is incredible, to say the least. And all of this is raising a lot of anxiety within people. And I pose to you the question, as EFM members, have you taken a look and reviewed the resources that we've created this past forum around climate anxiety? We were able to hear from Dr. Sarah Jaquette Ray about new perspectives and a new way to reprogram our understanding of what is feasible today, and also gave us hope for what is possible tomorrow, and knowledge or the type of narrative that we would want to give future generations so that they could be impactful environmental advocates as well. After that, we were joined by Elena Brower, who guided us through a mindfulness practice meditation. And through that, we were really able to learn how is it that we're able to comfort ourselves while also regenerating ourselves for the environmental work that we want to tackle. Now, all of these things that we really touched on in these past few months are deeply connected to today's title, which is Biodiversity and Rewilding. Climate change affects biodiversity. There is a significant amount of biodiversity loss due to climate change. And climate change forces species to adapt either through shifting habitats, developing new physical traits, but when species are not able to adapt, they perish. Climate change has increased temperatures, which has then impacted the level of browning and decrease in vegetation growth. It has also caused weather conditions to change, like the severity and the frequency of storms, fires, and droughts. All of this impacts us and biodiversity, as well as other practices like urbanization, construction of roads, pesticides, monocropping, deforestation, and the expansion of deserts. Today, we have invited a few environmental leaders whose work is admirable, and they're here to give you insight as to the macro perspective of biodiversity in our planet, but also giving you insight as to local opportunities that you can act on and opportunities that you can create. Our panel features Paul de Silva, who was fortunate to grow up surrounded by diversity, both in the context of marine life and culture. That was fuel to his deepening interest in the study of biology and ecology, particularly how human beings interact with their environment. He earned a BA in biology, a master's in resource management, and a PhD in entomology, all at UC Berkeley. Paul has conducted research in California, Hawaii, and Latin America, through which he expanded his awareness of people and species. His investigations have focused on natural ecological communities, exploring models of sustainable agricultural and horticultural systems. And in Marin, he taught biology, natural history, and environmental science at the College of Marin from 1997 to 2020, while participating in many local environmental and community groups, including the Environmental Forum of Marin. In 2020, he was elected to the College of Marin Board of Trustees, where he currently serves at present. We're also going to be hearing from Marcia Basala. It takes often the energy and vision of one person to get things moving in the right direction. California Native Plant Society member Marcia Basala is just that sort of woman. Over the last several decades, she has adopted several traffic islands in Novato, re-landscaping these areas with California native plants, together with her energetic volunteers. Her work has been instrumental in regenerating biodiversity in Novato's Pacheco Valley and other landscape areas. Marcia's concept is to convert these traffic islands to habitat corridors, allowing more safe passages with needed resources between natural open spaces. Homegrown habitat volunteers are growing many of the native plants needed for her projects, and the Plant Society has donated over the years to help Marcia's team create these resource-rich pathways. Please help me in welcoming Paul de Silva.
Thank you so much, Arlen, for your warm welcome. And I also thank all of the attendees for participating tonight. It's quite an honor for me to participate in this series offered for so many years by the Environmental Forum, a real homegrown Marin treasure. Well, what I'd like to do is begin by sharing my screen, showing some slides to you, and then as we go through things, I'll maybe raise a few questions, and then we'll have time for question and answer at the end. So here we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so here's our title, and we'll get into these words hopefully in a few minutes. I want to start though with a picture that was that I took many years ago. A sunrise picture is great. Just start with a sunrise picture. And this is a picture I took when I was returning to the Bay Area after an absence, and it highlights the difference between heavily urbanized San Francisco at the south and still mostly undeveloped Marin at the north.
Oh, sorry for interrupting you. We're not seeing your screen.
Oh, you're not seeing my screen. Okay. Let's then go back again. Share screen.
Yeah, do you want to share?
I forgot maybe to press one button. Is that what happened?
There we go.
Oh, you're seeing it now. Okay. Okay, so let's go back and let's see here. Okay, technical difficulty. Okay, anyway, so this difference between the heavily urbanized San Francisco and the less urbanized Marin County to the north really takes us back to the founding of the Environmental Forum, particularly if we look at Bolinas Lagoon here and Richardson Bay over here. We see that those are the areas where the founders had begun to work to realize their vision of a Marin preserved for people and nature. And the quotes that are here are from the EFM webpage. I think you probably are familiar with them. So there are a lot of wonderful things on the EFM webpage. I tried to distill down some of the thoughts to what I think really is the basic charge of EFM. And so what's the important goal? To translate the current environmental knowledge into public policy and environmental improvement. And the founders realized that they could do all kinds of things on the ground, but if they didn't have policymakers and policy in place to help them, it would be an uphill battle. And so that was how the Environmental Forum came into being. And so what I'd like to do today is to express what current environmental knowledge is about biodiversity, and then give some possibilities as to how that could be translated into public policy and environmental improvement. So we start at the macro level, the global level. What is the current environmental knowledge about our planetary crisis? Three main parts. Wonderful report came out in 2021. I encourage everyone just to go online. If you type into your browser, Making Peace with Nature, you can download a copy. The key takeaway is right on the cover. The three major challenges to our planetary survival now are biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. And of course, they're all interrelated. The word biodiversity deserves a brief explanation because some people ask, what is it? We hear a lot, what is it? Well, I like this picture from Apollo 8, I think. On the moon, there is no biodiversity because bio means life. There's no life on the moon, as far as we know. And diversity means the opposite of uniformity. So if there's nothing, no life on the moon, there's no, there's no diversity there, no variety of life. But if we come to the Earth, we see all the wonderful different kinds of living things, the different species, the different varieties, the different functions that they carry out in the ecosystems all over the world. And we are happy for that. And we can be proud or satisfied that over the 4 billion years of history of life on Earth, the trend has always been to increase biodiversity, except there are these drops. And we do know that at certain times, there have been catastrophic events that have caused drops in biodiversity. The biggest one was probably the Permian drop that was probably may have been caused by massive volcanic eruptions all over the Earth. And the last one was the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, probably caused by an asteroid hitting the Earth in the area of Yucatan, Mexico. So we think about the dinosaurs going extinct and we think, well, that's too bad, but at least life recovered since then. But wait a minute, there was that question mark. A lot of people say that we as humans are causing another mass extinction. And that has been called the sixth extinction because we've counted more or less 5 previous ones. There are several books of this name. And what I think we have to remember is that the number of species lost don't tell us the whole story. There are many species that have not gone extinct yet, but maybe on the unchangeable path towards extinction. Even before a species goes extinct, if its populations drop in number, then we say, oh, we have evidence that this is a downward spiral. We know that just losing the number of individuals in a population can lead to the loss of function of that population. It ceases to play its role in the ecosystem. And then because these different species interact with each other, we lose one, or we lose a lot of the members of one species. Then we have what we call cascade effects, many unpredictable impacts on other species and on the world around us. So the idea of the extinction vortex really comes from the water vortex. No matter how strong a swimmer is, once that swimmer gets close enough to the edge of the vortex, it's almost impossible to get out. So we hope that our species are not going to go into there, but some of them are. Of the species we have numbers for, we know that the monarch butterfly is probably the most famous. Marshall will probably tell you more about that later. In 2000, I had the privilege of going down to the Monterey Peninsula and seeing millions of them there at Pacific Grove at Monterey. And now it's a treat to see one. So we know that because of the work carried out by Mia Monroe and a lot of other people here in Marin and along the California coast, we have good records of the decline. There's been a little bump upward recently. And of course, you want to know more about monarchs? On Saturday at the Marin Art and Garden Center in the afternoon, they're having a whole special panel discussion on monarchs. Okay, there are many, many different populations of many, many different species that have been in decline. And this paper, put it here just so you can see what it is. You don't have to read that small print. But in 2020, what was this? This was in 2021, I think, or 2019. No, 20, yeah, anyway, this came out relatively recently and synthesized all of these, oops, wait a minute, where are we here? Synthesized all of these different, about 75 different papers. Now, why is it, the entomofauna just means the insect animals. Fauna means animals, entomo means insect. So all over the world, there's been a decline in insects. And why is this important? Well, because most of the species in the world are insects. There are a little over a million species that have been named by scientists, and most species are insects. So 73 studies, I guess. And so this was 2019, that's right. And so alarming declines. 40% of populations of insect species are in declines. Some groups are declining more than others, but then again, we have empty spots in our data around the world. So we have to be a little careful about interpolating or extrapolating too much. The main causes, habitat loss, pollution, introduced species, and climate change. And then talk about cascade effects. A lot of birds eat insects. We also have had a decline of birds in the United States and in North America. So lots of different technologies have been used, weather radar, on-the-ground monitoring, loss of 3 billion birds since 1970. 29% of the abundance of 1970s, almost a third of our birds have been lost, with the greatest loss of greatest declines of migratory species. Causes, again, habitat loss, the biggest one. And climate change is there, but probably habitat loss is bigger. And then you probably heard about the amphibians, poor frogs and salamanders, nearly 1/3 threatened throughout the world. Okay, we have to remember also that not all species are the same. They're not interchangeable parts, right? So particularly important are the loss of predators and specialists. We lose predators, and what happens to the prey populations? They get out of balance. We lose predators large and small. So we have to remember that predators are in all groups. Specialists. Most species in the world are specialists. This is something that's forgotten by a lot of people because we as humans are generalists. But most species, plants and animals in the world, have very narrow limits within which they live, either because of topography, climate, or in the case of animals, because of food. They may only eat one or a few kinds of food. So these are some of our local specialists. Our birds, again, this has been brought up again and again, may often specialize on certain kinds of insects. So if we lose certain kinds of insects because we've lost certain kinds of plants, because the insects are specialists on those plants, then we lose the birds as well. And so that's where we're getting a lot of different of these cascade effects. And so again, this is once one of our most common birds in California. Unfortunately, it's still around my house singing. I heard it singing this morning or yesterday morning. But every year we're losing some. And of course, we'll talk about the monarch as being an important specialist. So what about the effects on humans? Well, that's where it all seems to come down to in our human-centered world. And of course, we are humans, so it's reasonable to ask that question. More pests, more disease, less food, and probably psychological stress as well. We did not evolve in a non-diverse environment. The omnivores, the animals that eat lots of other foods, the generalists probably will increase. We're not gonna lose all the species, probably short of a nuclear holocaust that wipes out all life on Earth. But we're going to make things better and better for those specialists for those generalists, as we lose the specialists that prey on them and compete with them. And some of them are well known as our American cockroach and Norway rat. The cockroach didn't come from America and the rat didn't come from Norway, but anyway, that's another story. And then, of course, we've recently seen that these generalist pathogens that can move among different species, we've known for a long time that measles, influenza, these are all cycling among different species of animals. And we know that now COVID can infect more than 30 different species of animals. These are going to become more common as well. So the generalists increase, the specialists decrease. What about our food? Well, are we going to run out of food? Not exactly. People say we will still have bread. Because although most of our fruits and vegetables are insect pollinated, wheat is wind pollinated, so we may still have bread. Okay, so it's important now to, ask ourselves, what are the causes again? Fortunately, in California, probably climate change is not the biggest cause of species loss. Part of it's because of topography, part of it's because of just the way things are so bad in the world of habitat loss. So we're losing natural habits and we're breaking them up. And then invasive species come in and force out more of our native species that are specialists, the invasive usually generalists. And then pollution is probably the third. And climate change is there. We can't discount it. It's important. So certainly you look at the world, the map of the world, you see all these mega cities, that's habitat that's going on. Also the massive transformation of natural landscapes into agricultural landscapes, another loss of habitat. We see this happening all over the world, but also of course in California and Marin, it's happening, has happened. The invasive species are really interesting. Again, I mentioned they're generalists. We did some work with students at the College of Marin and looked at, what eats French broom. Sorry, I didn't introduce it properly, right? Many of you may know it, French broom, one of our biggest invasive species here in Marin. We found that if we compared the insects on the French broom to the insects on the native shrubs nearby, there were far fewer on the French broom, the red columns. And that's one of the reasons why it's has gone invasive through Marin. Very little eats it here. Pesticides. I put these stamps here because I found they were fascinating, showing the how, at least in a time, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, this was considered to be advanced technology progress. But of course, not only in agricultural areas, a nod to our local local Phil Frank, who passed away a number of years ago, and had some great comic strips. Here in Marin, probably the greatest amount of pesticide use is by individual homeowners, not by the government, not on open space. So something to think about. Okay, well, I want to operate on two levels here. And I think this will also help us integrate some of the information from the previous presentations over the last year with this one. There are some internal causes for these external causes. One of them had been pointed out, I think, in a previous, or hinted at least in a previous presentation, and I'll mention how it's becoming more and more mentioned every day now. Only 20% of the earth is under indigenous management, but it supports 80% of the biodiversity. This cannot just be a coincidence. There has to be something about the way indigenous peoples have managed their landscapes and have related to them. These are the biodiversity hotspots in the world. California is one of them, but many of them, yes, are in fact where there are significant indigenous populations, and also where there's incredible diversity of ethnic groups, languages, and traditions. Now, in 1992, about 20 years after the first Earth Day, there was what became called the Earth Summit in Rio, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And this produced 3 international conventions. This is sort of the beginning of the global attempt to translate needs into public policy. 3 international conventions. And the Conference of Parties, these COPs that appear in the newspapers and on TV and on the internet, are held at intervals to work for the implementation of these conventions. So at the Earth Summit, a very interesting thing happened. So Silva Suzuki was 12 years old at that time, living in British Columbia, and she heard that there was going to be this conference. And she said, the kids have to go. And so she started raising, we kids have to go, started raising funds to send children to the conference. And she wrote her own statement. Her father offered to help her. She said, no, I know what I want to say. And she became the girl who silenced the world, and even impressed then Vice President Al Gore. What she said at that time, she asked the audience, of course, they were all adults, right? The delegates from all over the world, did you have to worry about these things when you were my age, these environmental problems? You grown up say that you love us. Please make your actions reflect your words. Okay, I was fortunate to be able to attend the COP15 Biodiversity Summit in Montreal from 7th to 19th of December of last year. And but if you want to look at cbd.int/live, you can find all the recordings. I recommend the 7th International Subnational Government Summit. Okay, we can talk about that later. Anyway, so Silva Suzuki was back. She says, love is the most important thing, and our actions do not reflect it. She was very positive. She said, humanity did not cause the sixth extinction, but rather one globalized worldview, a mindset that is eating the earth and making us hurt each other. This is new and not shared by the majority. Local communities are the real actors. That is human scale. So we think about, okay, look inside us, what is it that's happening inside human beings that's really causing the biodiversity crisis? A lack of connection, a lack of specialization, lack of indigeneity, a lack of love, lack of reciprocity. Again, one of the themes of this particular year. We have rights and responsibilities, and so do all the other creatures in the world have rights and responsibility. This is something that's out at Cooley Local at Point Reyes. I thought it's interesting to think about this. It's good. It just raises the question. Okay, so we want to get to the solutions, right? So is rewilding really the best word? I've thought about this a lot. It has a long and distinguished pedigree in conservation biology. Many people are discussing it. But we have to take into account one insight if we want to use this word. Years ago, I had the pleasure of helping Kat Anderson with some of her research that she was doing on indigenous management techniques here in California. She has collaborated on 2 books. One, I think the first one was actually Before the Wilderness. Yeah, okay. And the second one was Tending the Wild. What she and all of the indigenous collaborators were able to show with a lot of evidence is that for 10,000 years before Europeans came and called this a wilderness, people were tending it. And so there have been a lot of relationships that were disrupted after contact, but we cannot forget them. So again, this idea that all human and non-human people, a lot of the indigenous people talk about human people, and then all the non-human people. There are the animals, the plants, the rivers, the rocks. These are non-human people. They also have rights, and we all have responsibilities to each other. The non-human people feed us. We eat them sometimes, but we also have to care for them. And so this is something that's very important to think about. So I would say maybe rather than rewilding, we might propose reconnecting, re-indigenizing, re-specializing, re-loving, de-invasioning, all these things that we could, other terms we could think about to enrich our conception of the possibilities that we have for a better world. Now, E.O. Wilson, before he died at the age, he was 100, I think, right? It was last year he passed away. He, of course, had been a distinguished ecologist for many years and come up with many mathematical formulae for calculating different things in biology and ecology. He used island biogeographical theory, which is an interesting biological theory, to calculate that if we were able to preserve half of the Earth, we would be able to preserve 80% of the species. And that then led to the proposal that maybe we can preserve 30% by 2030, the year 2030, which then became called 30 by 30. People more recently have been saying we need to break down the concept that the Earth can be divided into 2 halves that are completely separate from each other, that preserved areas can be separated from the people who live in the remaining areas. 30 plus 70 adds the 70% of the areas where humans live and work. And it emphasized we can't abandon those. We have to do our best to make those hospitable places for these non-human people, as well as hospitable places for human people. And this has led to the new term reconciliation ecology. It's one world, folks. And so let's not divide it all up. Okay. However, if you do look at the map, I guess you look at the globe at night, you do see the incredible impact of the urban areas. And many people have felt, they're sort of lost, right? They've been so thoroughly transformed, they don't have anything for biodiversity. Much to the contrary, a lot of ecologists are saying, no, we really have to take the urban and suburban area biodiversity challenge seriously. The urban areas are spreading, the areas are increasing. I just heard yesterday about the plan for a new capital in Indonesia and how the indigenous people there are very concerned about it, but the old capital, Jakarta, is threatened with being flooded by rising seawater due to climate change. So anyway, a lot of problems there. Anyway, more people, of course, are living in the cities. Up until I think 1990 or 1992, more people lived in the countryside in the rural areas than in the cities, and then it flipped. And now more and more people are living in the cities. And these cities and the urban areas and the suburban areas have great biodiversity potential. Many of the cities have been built in areas of high biodiversity, in biodiversity hotspots. And there's a great potential for restoring connections in the urban and suburban areas because that's where the people are, okay? And so this is just another example of one of the reports that's come out. Cities are important and suburban areas are important. So here we have Marin. We have the Mount Tamalpais area that is protected in traditional ways by the Marin Water District and by Mount Tamalpais State Park. We have all this other area around Marin. And if we can think of all of them as being part of this great potential for conserving biodiversity and increasing biodiversity, perhaps, that fits another ecological model that, okay, the core areas, maybe the areas formerly protected, but they're not enough, that organisms move around. We need to have other satellite areas connected by corridors, and that's how we're going to conserve our biodiversity. You look at a map of Marin County, you see the core areas to the west, Point Reyes National Seashore, also Mount Tamalpais, GGNRA. They have all these open space areas, they're all isolated. And so a lot of experimentation has shown that if you isolate one area that's protected, it begins to lose species because they can't move around anymore to get all of the things they need. So our current environmental knowledge, again, getting back to what I promised at the beginning, is that once an area's proportion of native plants falls below 70%, then there begins to be a decline of the entire ecological community. And again, Doug Tallamy is a person who is an entomologist from Delaware who's been working on that a lot. Hyper-local plants often support the native animals best, and neighborhoods with higher biodiversity have better human health. So how do we apply this? How do we turn this, Doug Tallamy's books, a very hyper-local version of one species, the yarrow? These may be better for wildlife and commercial cultivars. Several nurseries actually are getting into this, indicating exactly where in the Bay Area or in a county particular plants come from, particular native plants. And this is, again, a pitch for the trip on Saturday to Charlotte Torgovitsky's Home Ground Habitat Nursery. This is the Marin County Nursery, which is being upgraded for use. And around your own property, you may see native plants sprouting up where birds have planted them or where berries have fallen. And then again, increasing reports about the health benefits of biodiversity to urban populations. So current environmental knowledge is that, again, in typical Marin neighborhoods, proportions of native plants are below 1%. So have we made food deserts for wildlife? We have to thank Bonnie Morse for actually going out and doing these surveys. Marin's lagging far behind in a critical environmental area. This is a call to action. Again, these are not areas that can be used well by our local wildlife because they are not composed of 70% native species. So the logical deduction is that there's a great opportunity here. How do we do it? Well, let Marcia tell most about that, but here we are, back to the local. I think that's, that looks like Mill Valley there, right? Okay, so we have some good global models, but we have this great need for better local policy. Again, Singapore, a highly urbanized city, has been leading the way, and this is very unexpected at first glance, right? But the handbook of the Singapore Index on Cities Biodiversity, if you just, again, type in your browser the Singapore Biodiversity Index, you'll get the latest on how cities and urban areas can improve their biodiversity. There's a growing list of cities that have signed on. Basically, if you don't want to go to read that, the key take-home message is that the answer is inventory and improvement. You need to know how many native species there are in your neighborhood, as Bonnie Morse has started doing in San Rafael, and then you've got to improve it. And so in every town, and this is sort of where we can finish up here, there are policy opportunities all the time. The Marin Countywide Plan comes up for review every so many years. The plans of individual cities and towns are on their own cycles. The housing elements have been in the news recently, and these have been often accompanied by form-based codes that deal with plants And one of the great victories of a coalition this last December, or no, actually it was January, was to get the form-based code for Marin County to include language that all new developments need to include 70% native plants. This only applies to developments going through the county, not to the cities, but the city of Novato indicated that would follow that. And so everybody who's on this call or at this webinar can ask yourself or ask your local city government, what's the language in your own local plan? There are sustainability coordinators being appointed in many different cities and towns. So those are people who can who can be asked, well, what is our biodiversity policy in our local city and town? Here's some examples of wonderful biodiversity gardens that have been established. This is at the Bay Model in Sausalito. This is right in front of the Lark Theater in Larkspur. This is along University Avenue in Berkeley. And guess who this is? Marcia will come and talk to you about her experience in just a few minutes. So again, this was in the news. This is policy. And this is a place where the Environmental Forum can get back to its roots and actually begin to affect policy countywide and in cities and towns to improve biodiversity. And in doing so, it will help to build the links among all these different isolated areas. And in closing, I'm going to say it's time to think about deep diversity, which is a term that I've used here. Socio-biodiversity, I've heard used in Latin America, not so much here, but this is the diversity of human people together with diversity of people of all other species. And I find it very wonderful to have these human people going to the areas where we've had preserves established for the non-human people, but also let's think about then bringing the non-human people back to where the human people are concentrated. And I happen to know some of the wonderful artists who were involved in painting this mural. So they told me the whole story in the canal neighborhood in Centerville. Each figure represents a different culture from Mexico or Central America that has now representatives in Marin County. And the tribute is to the migration indicated by the train there. Just the same way that the rivers bring salmon in their migration and that the winds bring our monarch butterflies in their migration. There are other ways that bring humans on our migrations. So again, I'll finish here. And the NBCI is the Marin Biodiversity Corridor Initiative. Both Marcia and I have been at that from the beginning, collaborated with that from the beginning. You can go to marinbiodiversity.org for more information. And I think that's pretty much it. Did I do a good job, Arlen?
Absolutely, Paul. That was amazing. There was so much information there, and I can't wait to dive into the Q&A. And if anyone has any questions for Paul, feel free to enter those into the chat. We'll
it might be good, Arlen, to have Marcia go and then maybe together.
Yeah, absolutely. So Marcia will follow right now. We'll have her presentation. And then if people want to put in their questions, we'll moderate those and then we'll bring them up once the Q&A session will start. Thank you so much, Paul, for all of that information.
Yeah.
Well, now we're going to hear from Marcia Basala. And Marcia, welcome.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, and thank you all for attending tonight. I've written a story that I would like to share with you about a project that's very close to my heart. And its purpose is to tackle the biodiversity issue by planning out everyday traffic medians with native plants, thus creating a wildlife habitat. Just as Paul was speaking of in his talk. My love for the outdoors began as a child growing up in northeastern Ohio, running through open fields, chasing butterflies, climbing trees, catching frogs and turtles, and exploring the many wonderful open spaces still accessible at the time. A favorite pastime was lounging in the field behind our house to watch bugs and other critters crawl around me and on me. And through those treasured experiences, I developed a deep love and respect for the natural world and a sense of responsibility to protect it. Moving from Ohio to California when I was 17 was quite a change from year-round greenery and plentiful precipitation to seasonal dryness and even the smell of the air. But as gardeners usually do, I adapted and came to appreciate California's beautiful and unique environment and began to garden accordingly. Vegetable gardening was my main focus until 2002, when I began my official study of horticulture at Oakland's Merritt College, taking night classes. A class in California native plants was a revelation, and I was smitten. It just made so much sense to cultivate plants compatible with our climate, providing habitat for wildlife, building healthy soil, water without pesticides or fertilizers. So after 10 years, I received my landscape design and construction certificate. According to a study done by the Xerces Society, an organization, as we all know, that supports the conservation of invertebrates, which include butterflies, bees, wasps, and dragonflies, new roads built through natural areas have an adverse effect on the wildlife around them. However, native roadside plantings include traffic medians, can alleviate some of these negative impacts. And using these types of sites, which essentially are wasted space, can help create a patchwork habitat corridor. This had been my original idea in 2009 when I adopted my first traffic island. My studies led me to an Adopt an Island program in Nevada, where I live. And this program is sponsored by the Nevada Streetscape Committee, which is part of the Nevada City Council's boards and commission. The committee sponsors various beautification programs, and participants are citizens and businesses who sign an agreement to pick up litter and weed on a regular basis. Some participants elect to add new plantings, and the city provides a sign with the participant's name. While doing a city tree research project for an arboriculture class at Merritt, I came in contact with the maintenance supervisor, who asked if I might be interested in the program. Several islands in Nevada requiring remediation were offered for adoption. In July 2009, I adopted this 560-foot perimeter median, which sits in the middle of an open space area. And as you can see, this site, a blank slate, was begging for new landscaping. So what better way to use this wasted space than by planting a variety of native trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals to support local wildlife. This island is located in southern Nevada on Alameda del Prado at the entrance to a residential neighborhood called the Chaco Valley. The city had a few planting guidelines. Plants should be drought tolerant, cannot obstruct traffic sight lines, or spill over curbs into the roadway. Based on the measurements given, I drew a shape of the median for design purposes, and then based on my native plant knowledge, I chose plants compatible with the hot, dry oak woodland, grassland, and chaparral communities of the surrounding open space area, with seasonal color for about 8 or 9 months of the year.
Marcia, can I pause you
Yes.
just briefly? We're having a little bit of trouble with your slides. We're going to pause you just real quick while we do a quick
Okay, sure,
moment.
sure.
Thank you so much. We want to be able to see your beautiful photographs. Arlen, can you send those to me, please? And I can share them.
Apologies, everyone. Yes, Leah, those were sent to you.
Thanks, everyone, for your patience. We'll get that up in just one moment.
Sure.
All right.
I think number 2 is the most important one right now, so people can really get an idea of.
Let's make sure we can see the whole PowerPoint.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Let me just get it in full view. There we go. Present. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, so you're saying this is median space. Okay, and we're back on track, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the 560-foot perimeter, that particular island. So a planting plan was comprised of 95% California native plants. That was my major request when I consented to doing the adoption, and it was prepared using approximately 80 plants, which included a variety of trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals with an emphasis on seasonal color, with the, as you know, with the exception of a few months in late winter. And so the Streetscape Committee provided $500 for plant materials. The Novato Maintenance Department first prepared the site by scraping the surface to remove any residual plants and weeds, and added topsoil and laid down irrigation lines. Now this picture is probably a year in. For added natural beauty and focal points, 3 serpentine rocks, which is the California State Rock, were placed around the site. Planting was done in one day with Novato's maintenance crew. Seeing my first public planting go from paper to planting was really exciting and gratifying. It felt like a reward for the 10 years I spent in night class. And I was hopeful it would serve to inspire and educate the folks in the neighborhood about native plants' intrinsic beauty and their importance to a healthy environment, as Paul explained earlier. Initially, it looked a bit sparse, like this, as the plants were small, but since I knew their dimensions, I could visualize how they would eventually fill in. And as always with nature, there is constant serendipity. And many plants naturalized around the islands, finding other areas and other plants to grow with that were more to their liking. And I am constantly humbled by nature's design wisdom. And most times the result is even more pleasing than the original design. The initial overall reception from neighbors, as you can see, the road that people drive past, one way in, one way out. So I got to connect with people. As they drove by, they would stop and thank me and ask questions about the plan. Others gave me little treats, sandwiches, candy, and some made little cash donations. There were a few who were critical from the start, perhaps because of their misconceptions about native plants. And then in 2012, there was a resident who I had come to know when she would stop by and chat while I worked on the island. And this resulted in a collaboration to replant a small island next to, which is actually, it's above the top of this island. And then the slope area that I'm going to mention is over in that area too. So we replanted that, and we received permission from the city and they helped with the remediation, pulling out old non-native shrubs, adding soil, and providing plants and mulch. And once again, a planting plan was drawn up and designed with native plants and planted out by over a dozen community volunteers. And once again, it just made so much sense to expand that natural habitat with additional natives, complementing the initial island landscape and surrounding open spaces. And I'm going to mention Doug Tallamy as well. And according to Doug Tallamy, who's the renowned entomologist and author, our landscapes must perform 4 vital functions for sustainable relationship with the natural world. 1, support a wide variety of pollinators throughout the year. 2, provide energy for the local food web. These same plants share the energy harnessed with local animals, building their tissues out of carbon and holding it within their structure for decades. 3, protect the local watershed by planting natives with large root systems that promote rainwater infiltration, and trees with large canopies to soften the impact of pounding rain, which in turn holds tons of water on site after a large storm. And 4, remove carbon from the atmosphere. And in addition to performing these important functions, these sites also provide seeds and plant material in the form of seedlings and larger plants, which are propagated and grown on by homegrown habitats nursery. These plants are then donated to nonprofit organizations for various projects and also sold at California Native Plant Society plant sales. And then some plants come back to their original home to be replanted on the islands. In essence, they are coming for full circle where nothing is wasted. This island habitat is a reflection of California's natural beauty. I feel it every time I'm over there working, which is every weekend. It reverses the green desert effect of planting lawn and or plants whose sole purpose is for decorative purposes with little, if any, habitat value. Some examples of the plants that help create this dynamic biodiverse habitat are as follows. And please note, these descriptions are provided courtesy of Charlotte Torkovisky, my dear mentor and founder of Novato's Homeground Habitats Native Plant Nursery. Western elderberry, we have two really large elderberries that are very healthy, and they provide nectar and pollen in the spring for many important pollinators. In addition, berries in the fall for birds, especially migratory birds passing through on the Pacific Flyway. Coast live oak, which we all know, provide habitat for more than 500 species of insects, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. All oak trees are on the site are, as my aunt used to call, volunteers. That were allowed to grow on in various spots on the island. I didn't plant any of them. I think the birds and the squirrels helped out. And then hollyleaf cherry, this tree provides fruits and seeds for birds and mammals and is a larval host for the western tiger swallowtail butterfly. Then we have the shrubs, who are the main players because they are the most numerous. The coyote brush, which also grows on its own. Studies have shown that this shrub provides resources for more than 400 species of insects, which are the very foundation of all other life on planet Earth. Some birds like wren tits and white-crowned sparrows may spend their entire lives among stands of coyote brush. There is one in the slides, it's the one that has all the white fuzzy flowers on it. Native salvias, there are more than 9 different salvias in this habitat, providing nectar and pollen for numerous bees and butterflies, and an especially important source for our resident Anna's hummingbirds. The coffeeberry is a shrub that provides nectar and pollen for a diverse population of pollinators in the spring, and berries in the fall for birds and mammals. It is also a larval host of the pale swallowtail butterfly. We collect a lot of those seeds, and Charlotte grows the seedlings and uses the seeds to grow the coffeeberry. Monkey flowers are the small shrubs, are an important seasonal source of nectar for hummingbirds, especially rufous and Annas that migrate through California to summer in places much further north. Their migration north is, and I think this is just so amazing, is timed to the flowering of these beautiful shrubs. And then the last shrub is California fuchsia. These beautiful orange plants bloom in late summer and early fall and are a vital source of nectar, perfectly timed for the return migration of the rufous and Anna's hummingbirds to their overwintering sites in Central America. And then there are other important staples in the landscape. Native grasses of various heights, sedges and rushes provide important resources for native creatures, seeds for insects, birds, and mammals, covered during cold, rainy weather, and nesting materials for songbirds in the spring. The native bunch grasses also provide for the larvae of the numerous species of the grass skipper butterflies. More than a dozen species of wildflowers bloom from the beginning of our rainy season through early summer. And these beautiful flowers are also sources of nectar, pollen, and seeds, sustaining many native creatures. And then that's the coyote brush. 2 species of native milkweed were planted in 2018, courtesy of Charlotte. And they brought monarchs to the sites in July of 2020. They returned in 2021 and the year after, and basically remained until September, laying eggs for 2 to 3 broods. The residents in Pacheco Valley have been quite excited and credit these plantings with bringing the monarchs back into their neighborhoods. And as a result, the Marin County Parks has collaborated with Ignacio Rotary, and as a result, to plant them, to sheet mulch and plant milkweed and the California natives directly across from the site I maintain, and in order to expand the existing monarch station, way station. So hopefully we'll see more this year as those plants grow. There they are. That's my favorite picture of my larva. So working in the presence of monarchs is really a great joy, and as they flutter and swoop around. Sometimes there's just one, other times 2, 3, or 4 at a time. And they are truly magical creatures, and I'm really honored to be in their midst, and I'm really proud to have contributed to their resurgence. So So I have some notes on neighborhood relations. And the important lessons I've learned about working with surrounding neighbors. One must listen and be open to suggestions. Compromises are sometimes necessary, especially when people don't quite understand natives and what they do. For example, keeping the grasses and flowering plants trimmed back within reason after blooming, because the wildlife regularly uses spent flowers, seeds, and dried grass for nesting and cover. Educate folks about why we use native plants in public landscaping. And signage, where allowable, post interpretive signs describing the plants, wildlife they serve, and how they build, once again, a healthy environment, not just for the animals, but for all of us. And then I have just a couple notes on possibilities and solutions. My ultimate dream is to encourage municipalities to rethink their methods of landscaping public spaces, using a plan that utilizes a plant palette with a variety of native plants suitable for various sites, including a low water and minimum maintenance plan. And not the least of which, how this approach would ultimately save money, because as we all know, this is usually a city's highest priority. From my own personal experience, convincing public works department that native plants make more sense can be the biggest hurdle. And even though this is a more sustainable approach, the conventional methods of landscaping still seem to win the day. And then lastly, how do we transition to native plants in public landscapes? This is the most difficult part. Education. Develop statistics showing how native plants save money by less water use, and compare the water usage for natives versus lawn and or conventional ornamentals. Less maintenance. The use of native ground covers and sheet mulching to reduce need for weeding, and also shrubs, large shrubs that spread can also serve as a ground cover. Little or no need for pesticides, fungicides, fertilizers, or weed cloth. Educate the public through social media and newspapers, and creatively market programs to build awareness. And again, illustrate the benefits of a healthier environment for wildlife and people by promoting a natural, chemical-free landscape and California's native plant beauty. And then find a city that'll participate in a pilot program, making them a trailblazer in this approach, which I think would really build a positive, forward-thinking public image. And that's my story, and it continues after today.
Thank you so much, Marcia. That was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story and journey with us. I quickly want to apologize again to all of you for, we had originally set up the presentation slides so that it matched the text and the script that Marcia was reading out loud. We'll give you that experience in the handout. We'll make sure that the script goes out. You'll be able to read it as well as the recommendations. And you'll see which slides tie into the text to give you a more visual, illustrative example of that journey that Marcia just took you on. So thank you so much, Marcia and Paul, for joining us today. Now we're going to move into the Q&A. And I want to start out with two questions. I see that there's a few people who are raising their hand, and we have a question in the chat. But I would first like to start off the Q&A asking you a question, Paul. Last year, EFM's 50th anniversary was EFM's 50th anniversary. And Marin is benefiting currently from the work of our founders, as well as other environmental leaders. What would you like to see in the next 50 years?
Well, just as we can look at these wonderful photographs today of West Marin and Central Marin that are in a more natural state than proposals that were abounding in the 1960s would have produced massive freeways and housing developments. I think that in 50 years, I would like to see a similar awakening, perhaps, in East Marin, the urban and suburban areas. And essentially it would be a reconnecting. And this would be a world in which people would be much better connected to other human people would be much better connected to other human people. No mass shootings, no misunderstandings, because people were able to get along with each other. And then also the human people would be much better connected to the non-human people. So we would have everywhere, it would be the norm to have all over cities and towns in Marin, the type of project that Marcia has carried out. And that this would be encouraged by public policy. So right now we really don't have public policy on biodiversity that is sufficient for what we need in today's times. And so hopefully 50 years from now, all the connections can be seen and they'll be supported by public policy.
Thank you, Paul. And for you, Marcia, what's your recommendation for influencing decision makers to grow awareness in this intrinsic value of native biodiversity? Furthermore, how can we elevate native plants to be one of those solutions that we heavily consider both locally and globally for mitigation?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think, like as Paul said, I think we have to go directly to our city leaders and the county, but I think in where we live and coordinate an effort with people to say this is what we want, and then show them, just as I said, how it makes more sense. It's just with municipalities, it's always about money. I hate to say that, but that's what it's about. And so if we can show them how they can save money, but I think we need more people to get involved, to volunteer, and to understand, why natives and why these building our habitats make a healthier environment. I mean, it's pretty simple, but just getting people engaged is key.
If I could follow up just for a second on that, there's something that I found in my classes over the years, that when I showed people a picture of a panda, people knew that it ate bamboo. And when I showed people pictures of a koala, they knew that it ate eucalyptus because they'd seen these things on television. But they didn't know what the relationships of our local insects, birds, and mammals were to our local native plants. And so that's what we need to encourage. And again, if we combine Marcia's work with Bonnie Morris's work there in Santa Fe, we do the inventory. If every city and town has an inventory of its plantings and knows what the proportions are of native and non-native plants, then that is a springboard from which to advance towards more native plants.
I just want to add one little thing too, is if we can get beyond thinking that state and national parks are the only place where we really have, a natural setting, if people would realize that it should be everywhere around us, and not, shouldn't have to go somewhere. You should just be somewhere, in your own, location, your own home, to have wild areas or natural areas.
We're really touching on the local level and how housing and urbanization, and Paul, you referred to this in your presentation, has an impact on biodiversity. There's a question in the Q&A from Carrie. She says, Governor Newsom recently attacked on CEQA concerns me greatly. I worry California's housing crisis will be pitted against the environmental crisis. How can we address this so that both win? Paul, maybe this is a question for you.
Okay, so there are legitimate concerns from the environmental community of what is called green tape, because even environmental restoration projects do have to comply with a lot of regulations. So maybe some simplification is necessary. However, there is a valid concern that weakening CEQA, which is our foundation environmental law really here in California, is not a good idea. I think recently the Marine Conservation League, I think just last week, held a forum on that issue. And so a good source of information would probably be for here in Marin and for local sources of information on exactly what the details are that maybe could be changed to benefit environmental project, and which are the things that shouldn't be changed so that we can protect our environment. That would probably be found on maybe the MCL webpage.
Yeah, great. I see two questions. Two people are raising their hand. I'm going to call on Alice. If you want to unmute yourself, Alice, and ask your question. Maybe we can go to Noma. Alice, are you available? All right, let's go to Noma. Noma, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is Nona. Yes, I do have a question. Yeah, it goes way, way, way back. First of all, the Marine Conservation League is having another forum called After Hours on the 22nd, all on CEQA. Rachel Hooper, who is a well-known attorney for many, many, many years, is going to kind of unpack the current problems on CEQA and explain what's going on. So I urge you to check into the MCL website and find that for the 22nd, 7 to 8:30. The second is that, Paul, I need to go way, way, way back to the beginning of your talk, which is fine, and particularly enjoyed the story about Nevada. But going back, Paul, to the beginning, you showed an aerial view of the bay, and you showed how much you contrasted Marin County and showed how much of it was, let's say, undeveloped. In the next few words, you talked about some of the enemies of biodiversity, and you mentioned agriculture as one sweeping generalization. And so that is a major cause, and it is industrialized agriculture worldwide. But let's connect those two dots in Marin County, because more than a third of Marin County is agricultural land, and 95% of that is rangeland because it's ideally suited to that. We don't have vineyards. I'm grateful for that, I must say. We don't have industrialized farming, but we do have areas of rangeland that provide kind of a huge buffer, at the very least, a buffer to the public lands, because raptors fly over. They utilize the prey species in the agricultural lands. In other words, you've got to give some credit for our family farms that have maintained that more than a third of the county in open space at no public expense, such as in buying land. So that's just my, maybe Paul, you can elaborate on
Well, I
that.
thank you, Nona, for bringing that up. As you know, probably noticed, I didn't have a whole lot of time to discuss every single slide. And the pictures I showed were really of the massive conversions of natural habitat to, as you say, either industrial agriculture or Manhattan in New York. But I think just as our family farms show how farming and biodiversity can coexist if the model of farming is, and the type of farming is a good one. It's the same thing we can say about our urban and suburban areas. It's this idea of reconciliation ecology that definitely we can protect biodiversity and even enhance biodiversity on agricultural lands and on urban and suburban lands. So yeah, thanks very much. I didn't want to imply at all that agriculture was necessarily the enemy of biodiversity. In many cases, agriculture has been able to enhance biodiversity. So I guess the great thing we can say about what the early, I suppose, visionaries of EFM were able to do is to recognize that and to put into policy, such as the agricultural zoning, that protected the agricultural lands and allows them to still have contributions to biodiversity. What my main point is that we don't have policy of that type for urban and suburban areas, with very few exceptions. And so that's where a big need is. But yes, for many years, I did teach at the College of Marin, the Marin agriculture course, and I emphasized how important it was to have family farms. And there was an article, of course, in the IJ this last week, I think, about how, in addition to preserving biodiversity, locally produced food reduces the distance that food travels from farm to fork, as they say, and therefore is reducing greenhouse emissions. And so, yes, there's definitely a lot to be said about preserving our local agriculture. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks, Paul. I'm gonna
And
give
I guess another point would be to emphasize that with that things don't necessarily have to conflict. And so, yes, building more housing as is maybe something Governor Newsom wants to do, doesn't have to conflict with his biodiversity policy. So.
Mhm.
I want to give another chance for Alice to maybe ask a question. Alice, are you able to unmute this time? Alice?
She looks to have dropped back off again. Sorry about that.
It's okay. All
Yeah.
right. So there was a question here in the chat. I believe it was from Ed. He says, is there enough genetic diversity in our local native plants to accommodate climate change, or should we be introducing some native ecotypes from hotter areas?
No, thanks. That's a very good question. What recent research is showing is that in California, in particular, because of our topographical diversity, we probably don't have to go very far to find the genetic diversity we need. Often it might be just be the other side of the hill or the other side of the mountain. And so the general consensus is that we don't need to introduce other genotypes from farther away. Where we do have rare and endangered and declining plant populations, it may be useful to increase the genetic diversity and also the population size by adding to current populations. But the good news is that if we preserve enough habitat and enhance enough habitat, our diversity will probably be sufficient. And so that involves having large enough habitat areas, and the corridors connecting them.
Marcia, do you have anything to add?
I wanted to go back to about the farming, because I don't know if people are aware, but the Xerces Society has a program. It's called Roadside Habitats, and they work with farmers to create these buffer zones along their farmland, along the roadways and even in between the crops of, pollinator plants. And so, that seems to be really catching on. So that's one way it makes farming a little more, I guess, biodiverse. Yeah.
Thank you for adding that. And thank you, Susan, for highlighting Wendy's question, which is, what programs exist in the county to eradicate invasive plants?
So one of the things that's important, again, to emphasize is that a lot of times it comes down to a funding shortage. There are the different agencies, and again, there are public lands and private lands. So the different agencies have the job of dealing with invasive plants on their lands. And I know one TAM has a very good early detection and monitoring program. There never seem to be enough funds to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And then also we do have this problem of private landowners planting potentially invasive plants on their lands. And a backstory, the French broom became a big problem in Mount Tamalpais, in part because a group of local neighbors in the 1940s and 50s decided they'd go out and plant it to beautify the mountain. Now, it's causing big problems in southern Marin. It has not, it's beginning to get a foothold further up in northern Marin. There are some local groups that are trying to deal with this. Cal IPSI is the group, California Invasive Plant Council, that is the go-to place for information about invasive plants. There are individual groups that the different land management agencies sponsor to remove invasive plants on their land. So a lot of volunteer opportunities there. Just figure out which agency manages the land you're interested in. And the California Native Plant Society Marin chapter is beginning some programs. I know particularly in Nevada, they're concerned about the invasive oxalis there. So these organizations can all help. Cal IPSI, California Native Plant Society, and the land management agencies.
The county parks also, they're working on it because that area where they planted the monarchs, the milkweed and the other pollinator plants, they first removed a lot of broom and they worked with the Ignacio Rotary Club. So, you know, there, like you said, there are a lot of individual things going on.
I noticed there's a question for Marcia in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And then I'll get to that one. I kind of wanted to leave that one as an ending, but there's a question. I'm wondering if there's a few more recommendations that you would like to offer. This is a question by Patricia, and it says, can you provide a consultation about which plants would do best in certain median strips, or recommend someone else who can do this? Maybe Marcia, you can.
That's a Marcia question.
Yeah, provides a few recommendations of people who can get in contact with them and provide some advice.
Well, it depends on where I mean, I would be happy to talk to people. As far as plant recommendations, as I mentioned, you have to depends on the location and the weather and the, you know, what the rainfall, and if the particular medians some have irrigation, some don't. And so, I mean, I would be happy to talk to people if they were, you know, they'd like.
I'm happy to include your contact information in the handbook that we're going to send out to everyone who's attended here today and also signed up. So people will be able to contact you via email.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Here's another question by Patricia. It says, are there any grants available that you know of? It's a little broad, but maybe is there any grants that Paul or Marcia, you know about, to help people get started, to maybe provide maintenance, to help other people join this sort of work? There could be many different recommendations that you can pull in here.
The Marin chapter of the California Native Plant Society has an annual mini grant program.
Yeah.
That does provide grants to groups, schools, and other groups that want to plant native plant gardens, biodiversity gardens. And then I think another place, and again, this has been in the news recently, but unfortunately, I don't think it's all been good news. But the resource conservation districts also have funds available for different projects. So it's worthwhile contacting the resource conservation districts for, again, they work more on ranch lands, but they were able to provide plants for a recent project at the College of Marin. And then, yeah, those are two good sources.
Great. Marcia, do you have something to add?
Well, I've been getting the emails. It's the state has a big grant program also. And I'm sorry, I'll have to look it up and I can send it to you. And there's, you know, it happens, I guess, a certain time of year. And so people have to, you know, submit it, and there's a lot of competition, but I can send that to you, but there are possibilities. And then I don't know what other cities have in terms of island adoption. But I know, I don't know if San Rafael has one, but you know, why not go to a city and propose it, you know, if you had a plan.
Thanks. Now there's a question by OFA Marin. What designs or choice of plants enable you to remove carbon or reduce it? So recommendations on plants that are great carbon emitters?
You know,
or sequesters.
maybe the biologist can answer that question. I just I mean, I think of the oak trees, I think the elderberry trees, I just have, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I just have a large variety of plants out there. I think the native grasses are really important because the roots go very deep and they hold a lot of carbon as well. So I don't know, Paul, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I'm happy you said that because one of the things people forget a lot of time is the below ground part of the world. And
Right.
so the Marin Carbon Project, I think, and several other, there's the California Native Grassland Association, CNGA,
Mhm.
that focuses a lot on storing carbon in the soil through use of deep-rooted perennial grasses.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, is true is that a lot of our native perennials of all types have very, very deep roots, deeper than many of the common landscape plants. So that's another place where carbon can be stored underground.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I think, as Paul noted, there's a question for you, Marcia. How can people help you in your efforts? And Paul, if there's other ways that people can support your work as well, I'd be happy to hear that.
In my
Marcia?
effort, in terms of,
Yeah, I mean,
Spreading
adopt an island program or some of the work that you're doing out in the Pacheco Valley. How can people help?
well, they want to come out and help, physically help with, weeding or trimming or whatever. I'm out there usually on Saturdays, every weekend, and you have my contact information. And as you know, and Paul knows, I'm having a struggle with the neighbors out there who want to remove the island. And so, but I think,
Marcia, you might tell a little bit of background. I'm not sure everybody knows that has been a problem.
okay. Well, I wanted to keep it positive, but that's why, but I did include the neighborhood, the neighbors and dealing with the neighbors. There's a small group of people, they have a 501(c) where they're using the money to beautify and trim the trees and do some good things, but they also don't like natives. And they don't like the native plants. They think they're messy. And after 13 years, after 12 years, they've been lobbying the city of Novato to, even though I had a contract, to remove me and have me go somewhere else because they don't like the look for their neighborhood. And so all these, probably a lot of the people that are listening, people including Paul and so on, have helped out with letters and so on to support me, because it's not about me, it's about what we've been talking about, supporting the, as I say, the critters and the environment. And it's not about, oleanders and plastic lawn and things that don't really support anything except what they like. But there are more people that do like what I'm doing out there too. So, so that's kind of the struggle I've been going through. But I'm really optimistic because being able to put this out to more people today, I think gives me credibility and back to the city, because I think they're the ones that are falling behind. And that's why, is like Paul had said, is we should push the county and the cities to make a commitment to plant more. I mean, we have to. It's to me, the plants, as we all know, they get left out of the equation for.
Actually, that is an answer to another question that's in the chat.
Yeah.
Pat asked about what is the type of policy that a local town council could adopt. And so on the Marin Biodiversity Corridor Initiative webpage under policy, there is some sample language that was suggested to the county of Marin of 70% native plants. The other important thing for a town council to do would perhaps be to direct the local public works department to begin an inventory of the plants that the town is maintaining, and just figure out how many are native and how many are non-native. That's the
Yeah,
recommendation of the Singapore
right,
report, that you don't have to go to all native plants right away, but find out what your
right,
percentage is
exactly.
today, and then gradually increase them, because trees will die, shrubs will die, and you can gradually replace things.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so that's there's some good possibility there.
So I think my roundabout way, my point is, if people were to go to wherever you live, to your city, if you live in Nevada or San Rafael or whatever, like say, go, you let them know that this is a concern, that we want this done. And because they're just used to doing it one way. And we have to change our ways, obviously. And plants need to be a part of, it's not just electric cars and all those other things. It's, 1 out of 4, was it 1 out of 4 bites of our food are pollinated by native pollinators, for example. So yeah, any help is appreciated. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
We'll have those action items, and we'll also link all of these resources that you've been able to share throughout with us, both locally and through your presentation. We'll make sure that this audience receives those through the handbook. I just want to thank you, Marcia and Paul, for tuning in today and for sharing all of this knowledge with us and your experiences and your recommendations. We're now going to be finishing this portion of the Q&A, and we have a little treat for you all. One of the activities that we have for this session is an event at Home Ground Habitats where Marcia is able to receive some of her native plants. This is an excellent opportunity if you're interested in master gardener practices or tactics to learn a little bit more, to be able to learn from Charlotte, who is Marcia's mentor, who is very knowledgeable about pollinator plants, animals, birds, mammals, etc. They have a little video that we're gonna try to share, and hopefully we won't have what happened previously again. Let's see. It's a short little video, but it's short and sweet. Let's see.
There it is.
My recommendation would be that you come and visit us at Home Ground Habitats. We have beautiful gardens that demonstrate drought-tolerant, both native and other Mediterranean species of plants that are thoroughly at home in California and adaptable to our climate, our soils, our droughts. And here you can see the plants in the ground in their mature forms. You can have ideas about wonderful plant combinations, and you can get the plants from us and create your own gardens at home.
All right, that was amazing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So that opportunity, you can go to the EFM website and see if you can register. That's going to be this Saturday from 12:30 to 3:30. We invite all of you to check it out and see if you can attend. There is no more room for you to be able to attend this Saturday, we will include more information to see when there's other opportunities for you to be able to come to Home Grounds Habitat and hear from Charlotte and learn from her. I also want to invite you all to check out the Empowering Environmental Advocates series. We've heard so much information and opportunities where we can advocate and where we can take action. If you've already gone through the Advocate series, but you need a refresher, that's okay too. I hear information 100 times and I still need to review it. So if you feel like you need to come and refresh your memory of how to advocate and take next steps in your advocacy efforts, please join the next series. Or also share it with people that you think would really benefit, who struggle to amplify their voice and are unsure of how they can really reach policymakers or decision makers within their community. We'll cover how to build compelling advocacy messages, both in person and through social media. And it's, as mentioned, for those who have gone through it or those who are new to advocacy, please join us. I think at this time, I also want to thank the Environmental Action Committee of West Marin for sponsoring this year's forum. We're very happy to be able to receive support from local organizations who value education and offer the opportunity for us to keep making these programs for your benefit. With that said, I want to thank you all again. I want to thank our panelists for joining us tonight. Thank you all for joining us and learning with us and sharing with us. Thank you for tuning in to this program.